Van Susteren, and welcome to Newsmax Christmas Special. I'm here at the Billy Graham Library, where Christmas is celebrated in a big way, including even a live nativity scene. Stay with us for the entire hour. Coming up, Reverend Franklin Graham talks about what Christmas should mean for all of us. We will visit a live nativity with real people and real animals, including a camel. I hope you're vegan. Relax on a horse-drawn carriage around the Billy Graham Library. Former Vice President Mike Pence joins our Christmas conversation.
There's lots of presents, lots of food.
And we'll hear stories about what it was like to spend Christmas with the Reverend Billy Graham. When the Reverend Billy Graham passed away in 2018, his son Franklin stepped up to continue his father's mission.
My father was called by God to be an evangelist, and so my father preached the gospel.
And from the cross, God is saying to the whole world, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you.
He was always focused on what God had for today and what God has for tomorrow. People have asked me since my father's passing what I intend to do with the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. What changes am I going to make? I'm not changing nothing.
If you are willing tonight by faith to believe on him, he will come into your heart and he will radically change your life.
We're going to use the internet, we're going to use television, we're going to use radio, we're going to use crusades. We're going to take whatever steps we can to take the message of the gospel to the entire world.
One message, Christ and him crucified and risen again.
Newsmax was invited to the Billy Graham Library to experience the Christmas celebration. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you, Greta.
It's fun to have Christmas and come down here and see it.
It is, and you know you're going to have a chance to pet a camel. We're going to take a carriage ride.
That lured me down here.
Listen, thank you for coming.
All right, and we have several Christmas trees. We're down here in the Billy Graham Library.
Right.
A lot of Christmas trees all over decorated. Do you love Christmas?
I love Christmas, and my mother loved Christmas, and my wife Jane, she loves Christmas. She decorates the house, and she'll spend hours and days wrapping presents for the grandkids, and so it's fun.
Yeah, I was talking to Jane, and she said she had a lot of work to do. She makes a big deal for it for the grandchildren.
She does.
Yeah. What makes this so special? I mean, from obviously that's the fun to get the families together, but from a religious point of view, I mean, from a faith perspective.
Well, Greta, we are separated from God because of sin, and it keeps us from having that relationship with God. And Christmas is about God coming in person and becoming flesh and to dwell among men, to identify with mankind, and then to pay the debt of sin on our behalf. He took his own life, shed his own blood for our sins, and being God on the third day, he raised himself to life. He conquered death, but he came to die for our sins, and that was the purpose of Christmas, God giving. And of course, the Bible refers to God in the flesh as Jesus Christ. And so Jesus came to save us and to give himself for us. And so we celebrate Christmas and we celebrate giving out gifts, and because God gave. He gave himself for our sins.
And in terms of the whole giving, I mean, you've got Samaritan's Purse, which is probably unbelievable. How much have you given in Ukraine right now in terms of food?
We've given out 100 million pounds of food, 100 million pounds.
And still giving.
Oh yeah, that's just from February. We didn't start till June with food, so that's just in the last 6 months.
Blankets?
Blankets, stoves. We've had hospital up twice. We had to just take one down because of threats that were made against it. So.
And you're going to continue to give food and clothing to
and medical help. We still have clinics. And the hospitals that we've turned over to the Ukrainian government, but we'll probably have another hospital this year.
Do you find people give more, like to Samaritan's Purse, even like at this time of the year? I mean, like even the thing with the Ukrainian, really?
No question. I think when you come down to the end of the year, it's people think about giving, and maybe they've been waiting, for a few months to write a check or whatever. And so I think most charities at Christmas benefit in a large way because it's the giving history of this nation. And I think it's because we were immigrants, and when we all got here, we all came over on the boat, and everybody was poor when they came, and so people shared. You're talking about the small town you grew up in, just one store and one bank and that kind of thing. But people helped each other. So it wasn't the government. If your house burned down, you didn't go to the government. You went to the church, and the people of the church would come and take your family and give you a home to live in, or take you in with another family, and then the church would help you rebuild. We don't do that anymore. We've let the government take that safety net, when the church used to be the safety net, not the government.
But it also seems to, and it, not to take away from the people who give all year round, because a lot of people do, but we spike our interest in giving now at this time of the year. And you think that, if we can always spike our interest more often during the year to give, and more often to think of how we can be kind to each other.
Well, I think for us at Samaritan's Purse, Greta, when Ukraine happened, people just started giving immediately. When the hurricane hit Florida this year, people started giving immediately. And so for us, our spikes come throughout the year depending on what storms that we find in life. But traditionally, Christmas for all charities has been a time of season when people think about giving. But for Samaritan's Purse, if there's a storm or a war, people give.
The Billy Graham Library, where we are, does it do things special on Christmas or the Christmas season?
It is.
I'm about to see it, right?
We make it fun. There really isn't a place for people to go that's family oriented. You go to a mall, that's not family oriented. You go other places, you may have jingle bells, but the people trying to sell you something, or that kind of stuff. Here, a whole family can come, and they can go through the library. We decorate it. We've got a live nativity. They can see camels, and I think we got a Highland cow this year. We even had a monkey one year. And
I heard you wanted I heard, this is what I heard from your staff, is that Reverend Franklin Graham always wants an unusual animal, and they said that one year you wanted a crocodile, alligator.
I wanted an alligator. I thought
Did you
that would
get
be
it?
so much fun. No, they wouldn't bring an alligator because it would be too cold for the alligator. But I thought that would be fun to have a nativity with an alligator, and he'd open his mouth, and that would be fun.
How long have you had a live nativity scene here? How many years?
We've been doing this maybe 12, 13 years maybe. But Greta, it's something where the family can come. We have carriage rides. And where can you have a carriage ride? And there's no alcohol. We don't serve those kinds of things here. So you don't have to worry about a rowdy person. And I think last night we had over 3,000 people here, and people just having fun. We've got carolers. They can go through the library, the journey of faith through the library, and it's free. We don't charge any money. We have a bookstore. If somebody wants to buy a book or something like that, that's fine. But it doesn't cost anything to come here.
It's a nice Christmas experience
Absolutely.
for the family. Yeah.
And we just decorate the place from one end to the other. We've got lights in the trees. You'll see them. They're everywhere.
Your parents are both buried here, too.
They are, and that's what even makes it more special. When I come here, I sense the presence in some way of my parents. And you and I walked there together today to their grave. And they're not there, Greta. They're in heaven. That's just their what's left of this shell that we live in. But my mother would love Christmas. If she could smile, if she came up out of the grave, she would be smiling. She would just absolutely think this is fantastic to have all these people coming at Christmas, and to hear a gospel message, to have a family-oriented place where you can have fun and have a carriage ride and have some hot chocolate. She just loved that.
What was like you growing up? What did Reverend Billy Graham do on Christmas? I mean, what was your day like with your father?
Of course, on Christmas we all woke up early, and Mother made a stew oyster stew. And Greta, why? None of us kids liked oysters. But when she was a young girl, oysters were, must have been a big specialty, I don't know. But we had oyster stew. And we all gagged. And I wouldn't eat it. And she had like a little Santa Claus mug, and she'd put the oyster stew in the Santa Claus mug. Daddy had it. And I think he was doing it just to be nice to her. We'd all would rather have had some sausage and bacon and eggs and something like that, but the oyster stew. So, and then we'd read the Christmas story, and then we'd go open gifts.
Who'd read the Christmas story?
My father.
He'd gather all the children?
Yeah, we'd all be there together as a family.
And he'd read it?
Yeah, he'd read. And Greta, one thing we did in a family, it wasn't just at Christmas, but every morning before we took off for school, we'd take time, my parents would read the scripture, and we'd take time to pray. In the morning, because we were maybe a little bit more rushed to get to school, and some of us running late, my mother would read a passage if my father wasn't there, and then she would lead in prayer, praying for us children.
Every single day?
Every day. And then we went to school. When we came home in the evening, before we went to bed, we all gathered as a family. Now then, my father or my mother would read some scripture, and then we'd get on our knees, and we'd all take turns praying around the circle. And we'd pray for a missionary. You know, of course, as kids, we'd pray for our dog. You know, the cat was sick and or whatever. But then my mother always had a list of people in the community that were sick that she prayed for, or family members that needed prayer. But we had that every day, twice a day in our home. We read scripture and we prayed every day.
The fun part about Christmas, I think Santa Claus. You got any believers in your family?
Oh, I think I believed in Santa Claus. I was probably about 18 before I realized.
Maybe you lied just so they get more presents, though. There is that.
Well, the thing, my mother would always put out a cookie and some milk for Santa Claus. And the next morning there'd be a thank you note from Santa Claus. And I was probably about 10, 11 years old before I finally realized that's Mother's handwriting. So
it is fun. And in terms of, families with Christmas, some families, when they get together, Christmas is not a particularly happy day. I mean, is there any sort of advice or suggestion you have for families at Christmas?
Well, sure. Lock up the alcohol. And I think, Greta, so many problems is when the alcohol comes out. And a person has had a little bit too much, and then things are said, and then other things are said. Next thing you know, people are upset and slamming doors and leaving and getting in their cars, and it's lock up alcohol. And then, as a family, sit around and ask each other, well, what was your favorite thing you did this year? What was the most exciting thing? What was the hardest thing you did? Begin to have a conversation with the family and learn and listen, but lock up the alcohol.
Lock up the alcohol. What about bring up the politics?
Well, yeah, politics.
That's another one to skip, right?
Yeah, I went to a
politics?
Thanksgiving, and I didn't mention politics once, and we didn't have one argument.
Yeah, I think that's the solution to politics.
Yeah.
So you mix alcohol and politics, and you have a recipe for disaster in a large family setting.
You do.
Possibly.
You do.
Coming up, more of my conversation with Reverend Franklin Graham. And former Vice President Mike Pence joins our Christmas conversation. Have you talked to other world leaders, religious leaders about Christmas ever?
I talk about leaders. I talk about why Christ came. No question, Greta, with every leader I've ever met.
How about with Putin? You've met Putin.
Yeah, and I shared with him. And the way I put it, Greta, I said, Mr. President, can I just share with you what we as evangelicals believe? And he listened. And I presented the whole gospel message to him, and he just looked at me. And I don't know.
Well, like you had two heads, or like he was listening?
No, he listens. Oh, no, he meets you. He listens to every word you say. And another thing about Putin, if he says something, he says he's going to do it, you better count on he'll do it.
But as you're telling him about the gospel, he's looking to you, at you, listening to you. Did he have any sort of reaction?
Well, no, not really. His frame of reference is the Orthodox Church. And he was raised in an atheist system under communism. But under Putin, he has allowed the Orthodox Church to grow not evangelicals.
It's interesting that how different parts of the world are embracing the evangelicals more. You've recently preached in Milan, Italy, which is a Catholic country, Christian. But after all the contributions that Samaritan's Purse did to heal that country when they were in such despair over COVID.
Well, we set up at the hospital in Cremona, and that was Cremona was the epicenter, or Milan, the Lombardy province in northern Italy, was the epicenter for Europe for COVID. And the reason is the Chinese were helping to build a high-speed railway, and the company was from Wuhan. And there were daily flights from Wuhan back and forth to Milan, every day, back and forth. And so COVID came in, and people didn't know where it was coming from at first. And it became the epicenter. And the area was falling apart, Greta. And no one from the EU, Germany, France, England, no one helped Italy. And Samaritan's Purse came, and they asked us. They heard we had a field hospital, and we said, will you want us to bring it? They said, please. And we flew it over in our DC-8. The NATO forces helped unload the airplane. The Italian army helped us set it up. We set it up in one day in the parking lot of the hospital in Cremona. And the hope that gave the hospital staff to see another country coming to help them, and Christians coming to help them. It really raised their hopes, because they didn't think they were going to make it.
If there's any place in the world, what's on your wish list where you think it's going to be the hardest place to get into to preach? What?
North Korea.
North Korea? Well, I heard you preach in North Korea years ago.
Well, we preached in a church, which was a government-controlled audience, but to be able to go back and have the freedom to preach to a group of people that wasn't put on by the government, that would be. So how would it be different? I mean, it's like the church was a church, state-run church, and they gathered the people. So what would you want differently? Well, if I had the chance to, if I could, to be able to speak freely, to.
Well, you didn't hold your punches when you were preaching. I mean.
No, but be able to invite people from off the street, just a group of whoever wanted to come, and let me speak to them. When the church in North Korea, that wasn't whoever you want to come. That was just controlled audience, and those were all government people that you were talking to. And so, but to be able to talk to the people out on the street, and Greta, you were with me. We were on the street. Most people would not recognize. Very few would smile at you. They'd walk past you.
I didn't even look at you.
But there's a wonderful picture of you waving to this lady, and she's got a big smile, and she's waving back, and I would like to speak to people like that.
So is Christmas only for Christians?
Oh, I think it's well, first of all, the world celebrates Christmas in some fashion or another, and we're celebrating Christ's birth. But no, the whole world should rejoice.
Today was a particularly big day here, not just because of the live nativity scene and book signing, but you had Reverend Billy Kim here.
Yeah.
And you named a hall after him
Yes.
here. Who's Reverend Billy Kim?
Billy Kim translated for my father in 1973 in Seoul, Korea, to the largest crowd my father ever spoke to us, 1,100,000 people in one gathering. Now, he was there for several days, so it was over 3 million people total, but the biggest night or afternoon was 1,100,000. And the Koreans it was on an airstrip. And so they had the airstrip in sections, and so they could tell from the pictures how many people could stand in a section. And so that's how they counted it. So it's very exact. And so that was, Billy Kim was the translator for my father. And after that, he kind of became known as the Billy Graham of Korea, but a great friend, a great supporter of our ministry, a great defender of the faith. He's one of the leading evangelicals in Asia. And so we named this hall, and we're sitting in it after Billy Kim, this great man of God.
It was interesting in studying who he was, because I knew I was going to be down here, is that when he translated for your father in 1973 to 1.1 million people, that at least what I saw or heard him interviews, that he tried to make sure that he passionately replicated what your father was saying in the Korean language, is that, that he listened to him, he studied him so they could even do the same gestures.
Yes. And he did. And so if my father raised his voice, Billy Kim raised his. If my father gestured with his right hand, Billy Kim would gesture with his right hand. But you always need a translator who will, if you make a mistake, who will fix a mistake. And Billy Kim said today that my father said that Korea had no sheep. And Korea did have sheep. So Billy Kim, when he translated, he said, Korea has many sheep.
So you corrected your father, so the people listening didn't realize.
They didn't realize.
Yeah. Did Billy Kim talk about evangelicals in Asia and any particular problems they're having? Have you ever spoken to him about that?
Well, the church in Asia suffered, especially in Korea. The communists killed almost all the pastors, and even in North Korea today, and you've been there with me. There are a couple of churches, but they're for show. And as far as real congregations, a person would be executed.
Different parts of the world, it's so difficult to practice your faith.
Yes, no question. And it's going to get difficult in this country. We see where people of faith are being attacked because you stand for your faith, and you're not going to do something that goes against your faith. And we have right now arguments that were argued before the Supreme Court of a person in Colorado who had a website and wouldn't design a website for a group of people because it went against what she believed. And so being sued, taken all the way to the Supreme Court because it went against her faith. So yes, I think we're seeing in this country the beginning of persecution. There, the baker in Colorado had the cake he wouldn't make, and the florist who wouldn't do flowers for a particular wedding. Those things are people are being sued, taken to court, and that's happening.
Up next, a personal tour of Billy Graham's childhood home. And former Vice President Mike Pence joins our Christmas conversation. Okay, Franklin, tell me, this is your grandparents' house?
This is the home. My father wasn't born in this house. I think he was about 16 when my grandfather built it. The home place that he was born in was about 100 yards from this house. Oh. This house was moved to this property, but from the photographs that we had of the house, Greta, we were able to reduplicate the wallpaper, the linens, the carpet. Everything is identical to the way my grandmother had it.
What did your grandfather do for a living? I know what your father did, obviously.
My grandfather was a dairyman and a truck farmer. You know, he raised vegetables and sold milk.
And about how old was your father when your grandfather died?
My father would have been in his, he may have been 40.
So your grandfather's able to see what your grandfather did with his life.
Yeah. And my grandfather was just a farmer. I mean, he chewed tobacco and spit tobacco, and so cars didn't have air conditioning back then. So if he was driving and you were in the back seat, you better be careful.
Yeah, the Christmas tree with is that an angel at the top? It's pretty modern looking angel or something.
Well, I think it's
quite an angel.
It's quite an angel.
Yeah, it's quite an angel.
Kind of a.
You know, it's funny. When I was growing up, we had sort of a raggedy old angel because we couldn't afford to buy an angel every year. You know, and after 15 years, these angels get a little raggedy looking. You know.
And I don't know where the angels came from putting on top of a Christmas tree, but
yeah, where did that come from?
I have no clue.
Look at how I mean, the living room's even. You know, it's small. You know, it's much more conducive to sitting around just talking. What's this?
This is President Nixon sitting right here.
Look at Nixon sitting right here.
Right.
Look at that.
Right there.
And that's Pat.
Yep.
How many presidents your father preached to? I mean, ministered to. Going back to whom?
It goes all the way back to Truman.
Who was the disciplinarian growing up in your family?
Mama.
Your mother was?
Oh, yeah. Because she didn't want us to dread my father coming home. Because if she said, well, you wait till your dad gets home, he'll take care of you, then we would always dread his homecoming. She took care of the discipline problems before he came, so that when he came home, we as children We're excited to see him. This is the kitchen.
Look at this stove. Is this the real stove? Or a facsimile?
I think it's similar. Yeah, it's similar because when I was growing up,
Oh,
it was
look
a
at
little
that
bit.
oven.
Yeah.
You imagine making Christmas dinner on this?
Yeah.
That's rather, yeah. Look at that. How can you get a turkey in this oven?
See, you can see my grandmother.
How in the world would she get a turkey in an oven this size? Boy, Frank Graham? Is that,
Frank Graham.
so your father's name was Frank?
No.
They say your grandfather's
that's
Frank.
my grandfather was Frank Graham.
And what was your father?
Billy Frank.
And you are?
Franklin.
But
But we're all William Franklin. So to
it's
keep
like who's on first?
Yeah. So they called my grandfather Frank, and my father, all of his brother and sister, and they always referred to him as Billy Frank. So if you were the family sitting around the table, they would refer to Daddy as Billy Frank.
And then
And I
Billy
was Franklin.
And you're Franklin.
Yeah. And my son is William Franklin Graham IV.
And you call him Will.
Will.
That's like, that's a contest. Coming up, former Vice President Mike Pence joins our Christmas conversation. The Billy Graham Library is a hub of activity this time of year, and today, former Vice President Mike Pence was there signing copies of his new book, So Help Me God. Mr. Pence joined our conversation. Gentlemen, thank you, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Greta.
Lots going on in the world, lots going on in the United States. Is it possible, let me ask you first, Mr. Vice President, can the Christmas spirit somehow heal a lot of this divide in this country?
Well, it always has. I think Christmas is a time of the year when we start to think about the permanent things. For millions of Americans, we'll gather on Christmas Eve and Christmas morning and celebrate the gift that came and the birth of the Christ in that manger so many years ago. And then we'll also just celebrate family and the blessings. For me and my family, it's always been a time of reflection on God's grace to us over the course of the year. There's lots of presents, lots of food, lots of fun and traditional music. But for millions of Americans, it's about faith and family, and that's a wellspring of healing, and always has been for our country.
Reverend Graham, what's happened to us? I mean, we're so divided. I mean, I listened to the Vice President talk about, how important Christmas is, but, we're pretty much at each other's throats in a lot of ways in this country.
What happens is, as a nation, we've turned our back on God. And I believe this is the problem we have, is we get further and further away from God. We become more self-centered, and we see it's anger. And that's what I haven't seen so much before in this country. It's the anger that people have, and the road rage, and the violence that we see that's increasing. Only God can change this, Greta. Politicians can't change. Only God can change it.
And so how do we turn down the temperature?
Well, first let me say, I think our politics are more divided than any time in my lifetime. But in my time as Vice President, in my service in Congress, and as Governor of Indiana, I have to tell you that I'm convinced I'm convinced that there's always more that unites us in this country than could ever divide us. And if we'll turn our hearts back to God, if we'll turn our hearts back to faith, if we'll turn our hearts back to loving our neighbor as ourselves, that this time of division will pass quickly. And it isn't that we won't have differences. It's just that we'll get back to being able to debate those differences in ways that show respect and civility that Americans really show to one another routinely every day. But I must also tell you that during my time as Vice President and in all of my service, my opinion of the American people went up, not down. And ministries like Samaritan's Purse that literally help organize tens of thousands of people who will travel to the site of natural disasters, of floods and hurricanes and tornadoes, and work in the front yards of people that they have never met before and will never see again. Just reminds me of the heart of this country. It is a heart of giving, I believe, and a heart of faith. And I think if we turn our hearts back to that foundation of faith and of generosity to one another, we'll see our way through these divisive times.
You know, Reverend, I've seen some of your meetings, all the people gathering, and everyone is wonderful to each other, and they all have the same purpose. And yet I don't think they all agree, but you don't see any of that dissension at your meetings. You know, that you might take the people and put them in another environment, and they might argue. But at your meetings, it's like they're all on the same page.
Well, the people that come to the festivals or crusades that I do are people that are, I believe, drawn there by God. They're people that are searching, they're looking for meaning and purpose to their life. They may be coming from different backgrounds, they may disagree on political issues, but they all have hungry hearts. And they're wanting to know God and what God's will is for their life. And of course, Greta, I preach just a simple gospel message that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shouldn't perish, but should have everlasting life. And this is the message that my father preached, that I preach. And people are searching today. People watching this program will have hungry hearts, wanting to know, how can I have a relationship with God? How can I have peace in my heart? How can I know that my sins and the evil that I've done in my life, how can that be forgiven, and know that I'm forgiven?
I'm very moved as ever by what Franklin Graham just said, that as we think about this season, we think about Christmas, it's a great time to be challenged, to ask yourself and examine yourself and say, what am I doing for others? How am I showing God's love in tangible ways? Sometimes that's a contribution, which tens of millions of Americans make around the Christmas season. Now, I wrote in my book recently about how my dad used to load all of us kids in the station wagon and take us to the underprivileged side of the small town we lived in, right before Christmas every year. He was part of what was called the St. Vincent de Paul Society in the Catholic Church I was raised. But Dad would load the back of the car with groceries. And me and my three brothers came along ostensibly to help carry the food in, we thought. But as I grew up, I knew my dad didn't bring us along to help us carry the groceries into these families, some of whom lived in homes with dirt floors. But, you know, my dad loved the Lord, and he wanted us to see that faith without works is dead, that especially this time of year, but throughout the year, it's about seeing the need of people around us and responding in tangible ways, as I know millions of Americans have done in the days leading up to this Christmas and in the days that follow.
I know it's a time of giving, but we were all children one time. Best present as a child was?
Well, for me, it was a G.I. Joe who was in an astronaut uniform, and then I had a space capsule that came with it. I had a fascination from the time I was little with the space program, and you can imagine what a privilege it was for me to lead the National Space Council at a time that our administration was able to see Americans return to space on American rockets from American soil. But that all began as a little boy who watched Neil Armstrong on that black and white television in our basement step onto the surface of the moon. And my parents knew that fascination, and it to this day is still my favorite present.
Your favorite present?
One morning, I remember I came down and everybody's stockings were full and so forth, and I was looking for mine, and there it was, full of ashes and switches. Mm-hmm. And I just looked, I went, what? And of course, Mama had a big laugh, and she was grin from ear to ear. She had hidden my stocking behind the sofa. But all the other gifts at Christmas, I'm not sure, but I do remember the ashes and switches.
Gentlemen, thank you, and again, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas,
Greta.
Up next, my chance to talk to the animals. It's a lot of fun. Look, they're all looking at us. What are you looking at? What are you looking at? You're posing? Do you want to pose?
He's checking you out, Greta.
I know. I hope you're a vegan.
He's-
You have beautiful eyes.
I
You have
don't know
beautiful eyes.
what camels do, if they spit at you or what they do.
Llamas spit.
Llamas spit.
I know.
I've had that happen.
Me too.
Oh,
I've had it in my hair and everything. This little girl is pregnant.
oh yeah. Well,
Well, I think she's going to the bathroom. Thank you for that. The way I was, it's like in
Haiti. Remember that in Haiti?
Oh my, yes, of course. It's so funny. So we have a live nativity scene.
Live nativity, Greta.
Probably the only one in the whole country, maybe the whole world, with Joseph and Mary. They're
Yeah.
real. The wise men,
Yeah.
they're real.
They're real.
The animals, they're real.
They are.
You can't have this in America anymore. In a lot of places, though.
Well, there's been, the secularists have opposed Christmas, just Arkansas this last week. There was one person who complained because they had a nativity set on the library property, and the city got together and they said, you know what, we're going to keep the nativity set there because it's been there for 50 years, and we're not going to allow one person to destroy our Christmas. One person raises their voice and says, okay, we got to shut it down. But we don't do that here, and because this is what the library is all about. It's about Jesus Christ and his birth and why he came to this earth. We want the world to know why he came. So, and this is fun.
It is fun, and not only that, is you could read this to a young person, but they don't. This tells the story so much better.
It tells the story
when you can actually see the animals and Mary and Joseph
Yep.
and the wise men.
Got the shepherds.
The shepherds.
It got it all.
Yeah, the shepherds. I mean, the shepherds.
The shepherds.
And so the music plays. Someone tells the story.
Yeah.
The census first took place while Quirinius was governing Syria. So all went to be registered, everyone to his own
Yeah.
city.
Mary and Joseph are real.
Joseph
they're real.
also
Yeah.
went up from Galilee, out of the city
No,
of Nazareth,
I
into
didn't know
Judea,
this was coming on.
to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed wife, who was with child. So it was that while they were there, the days were completed for her to be delivered. And she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling cloths, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. You will find a babe wrapped in swaddling cloths, lying in a manger. And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, Glory to God in the highest, and on earth, peace,
Don't let him kick
goodwill
you.
toward men. So it was when the angels had gone away from them into heaven, that the shepherds said to one another, Let us now go to Bethlehem and see this thing that is come to pass, which the Lord has made known to us. And they came with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the babe lying in a manger. Now when they had seen him, they made widely known the saying which was told them concerning this child. And all those who heard it marveled at those things which were told them by the shepherds. But Mary kept all these things and pondered them in her heart. Then the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all the things that they had heard and seen, as it was told them.
Hey, buddy.
This fellow's the funniest.
How are you? Oh, now he's backing up. He's not too sure.
I want to take the camels home, and the goats, and the sheep. Coming up next, Reverend Franklin Graham gives us some final thoughts while on a carriage ride. It was finally time for our ride in a horse-drawn carriage around the property, a special attraction here at the Billy Graham Library for many years, loved by children and adults, and a way to slow down and relax.
Last weekend we had over 3,000 people in the evening.
Really?
Yeah. And the line, the line to get on the carriage goes down the block.
And it's all free. No one has paid a cent.
No, you pay nothing. It's absolutely free.
It's like, I don't even know of places where they have.
And of
Just-
course, when it's dark, these bags, these luminaries, and we got lights in the trees, and it's just...
It's magical.
It is. And you hear the click of the hooves of the horse, and it's just a fun place to come. So you see some of the lights in the tree, but the sun's just now setting, so it's hard to see them all, but We light the whole place up.
It lets people stop and think about Christmas in the sense that they stop their busy lives. They're here with their kids. The kids ask about Christmas. You know, they go through the library.
You know, we were talking, Greta, when your father was born, and our father was born, the world traveled at this pace.
Like a horse.
A horse.
Before cars and, I mean,
Airplanes
before cars and airplanes.
Jets and...
It's not a bad pace, actually.
It's a great pace, isn't it? Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays during Christmas holiday, we serve dinner down here at the headquarters. So you reserve your table for how many seats, and you come and it's prime rib, it's iced tea and Coke or whatever, and your whole family, you take a table, and we serve your food. It's just a family-friendly environment.
Well, there seems to be so many aspects of Christmas that you've got, you know, faith, you've got family, you've got building traditions, giving. Mm-hmm. I mean, so many of those things that are all sort of come together on Christmas.
Well, Greta, because it's God or Jesus Christ who set the example by giving his life. That's why he came. He didn't come to condemn us, Greta. He came to save us. And so he gave his life for us. And Christmas for the Christians is about taking what Jesus, the example that he set, and doing that, giving to others. And we've become a pretty selfish society.
200 million shoe boxes, those little gifts have now been given out. All those kids get the Christmas spirit. They all get gifts.
All of them.
10 or 11 or 12 million a year get those.
That's correct.
That would otherwise not have that.
And it's still growing.
Still growing. Our Newsmax special Christmas has come to an end. We hope you enjoyed our visit to the Billy Graham Library and got a little Christmas spirit along the way. Merry Christmas.